For everyone that doesn't know me, my name is Jeff. I'm an appraiser here. I've been in the business pretty much my entire life. My whole family is actually in real estate.
You were born into
I was pretty much born into it. Yeah, it was a requirement. I went to college and I went and got a finance degree and thought maybe I'd do something else, and I just got sucked back in. So it's apparently a family thing. But just for those of you who don't know me, I was born and raised here. Like I said, my whole family's in real estate. My dad, Larry, has been an appraiser for, I think, like 45 years now. I have 2 little kids and I'm married. I began working in real estate in 2004. Like I said, I have a bachelor's degree in finance, and I got out and I decided I was going to do something with financial analysis. So I got a job with a defense contractor, and I quickly realized sitting in a cubicle how much I liked real estate. Right? I think one of the things that we all love about it is the perspective of being in and out of houses, meeting people. There's a lot of awesome things about real estate, and I honestly think it's like the best market. So that got me back into working in appraisals. Over the last 10 years or so, I've worked on about 12,000 appraisals, which has given me the ability to really learn a lot. At the beginning, I didn't know what the heck I was doing, and over time, I learned a lot through talking with my dad, through just really breaking things down and learning how to analyze properties. I've learned a lot that I'm going to try to share as quickly as possible today. So I'm going to go over a decent amount of information. If you have any questions, I'm going to get to a section at the end where we can ask questions. So if I move through something a little bit too quick, just write down a note and then feel free to ask any questions you have at the end, because I may cover it in the coming slides. I'm also the founder of a company called Property Brain. It's a real estate software company, and we are coming out with, we currently have a beta version of an app that does basically everything I'm going to show you today and talk to you about. I built a system to do the valuations that I do that take me hours and hours in an appraisal that you can do it in 10 minutes. So we offer free trials on it and stuff, so if you're interested, you can check out more, and I'll show you more at the end about that. Today's title was How to Pick Comps Like a Boss, right? So that's the first thing I'm going to start with. I'm going to talk about how to pick comps, and then kind of where to go from there to take those comps and determine the value of a property. So the first thing we want to talk about when picking comps is some of the myths. There's a lot of myths about picking comps. You may have heard from a lender or from somebody, from an employing broker, an appraiser from years ago, and a lot of them, like I said, are just myths. Like, it has to be within 1 mile of the subject. It has to be within the last 3 or 6 months. It has to be within a specific number of square feet. It can't be a different style. If you're doing a 2-story, it has to be a 2-story. Can anybody think of any other ones than this that you've heard? Have you ever been told anything else that you have to hit when you're looking at comps?
age,
Age, right? Some people say it has to be within a certain bracket of age.
acreage.
Acreage, yep. Like I said, the thing with any of these is that they're not rules. They're only guidelines. Okay, so the important thing to remember is that you want to pick comps that are as similar as possible, but you need to expand to make sure that you have enough data to actually get a good search. Okay, so if you have to go to something that's more than 1 mile, that's fine. What you can't do with any of these things, these are, like I said, they're guidelines, but what they don't want you to do, and most lenders don't want, is you can't ignore a comp that's a half a mile away to go to a comp that's 1.5 miles away just because it gets you the value, right? You have to use the best comp, the closest to the most similar. So you can't overlook things.
Does school district apply?
School district does apply. It's one thing you would want to factor in, just because it's, say you have your subject properties in District 20 and you've got a District 11 comp, doesn't mean it's not a good comp, but there might be a value difference. Same thing with something that's sold, it's a different style. You have a 2-story, a rancher can be a very good comp. Has anybody in here ever been showing people a house and they said, I swear I'm only buying a rancher, and then they don't buy a rancher? Right? It happens all the time. So it's not to say that something else can't be a comparable, it just means that it needs to have a value associated with it, okay? So to pick comps, this is what I would recommend. Everybody has a little bit different style. Most likely, everybody in real estate, you get into real estate and somebody tells you, here's how you pick comps, right? A lot of times, I've talked to the people that teach people how to pick comps, and they say, I don't know how to pick comps. I was kind of showed it at one time, and I didn't really think through it. So I'm going to try to give you some guidelines to go through. The first thing that I recommend, wow, that is really tiny type, is to draw in a map boundary. Like I said, you don't have to be within 1 mile. That's a good guideline. A lot of lending regulations say it needs to be within 1 mile. So what I would recommend doing is when you're doing your search, in PPMLS, when you can put in an address and tell it what to do. Give it an address so that it figures out a radius. And the reason you want a radius is because then in your search results, you can actually see which properties you can filter by which ones are closest, okay? But it doesn't need to be within a mile. Ideally it would be, and ideally it would be much closer than a mile. But like you can see here in this image, I drew in map boundaries here. This is up in Northgate. I'm going up to Northgate Boulevard. I'm going over to Highway 83, down to Interquest, and back up I-25. Many people that are searching in Flying Horse are also going to search in the farm. They're also going to search in like Stone Crossing, that sort of stuff. So all of this could be a potential market area, and it might be slightly more than a mile. So it's important to be able to draw in your map boundaries so you're not just limiting yourself. Also, you'll see my home in this example is right here on I-25. In this scenario, it doesn't matter. There's nothing on the west of I-25. But if you're looking at like something like down off of Highway 115, Nevada, there's a very big difference between the west side and the east side, right? So if you say, oh, I went a mile, and yours is right on that border, you may be including half a mile worth of comps that aren't good comps. Now, again, you can address that with adjustments and all that, but that might be something where, again, school district, District 12, District 2, somebody, the typical buyer, you guys know buyers as well, better than anybody. What would they look for? Is your typical buyer that's buying in District 12 saying, I'm also willing to buy in District 2? No. Or are they saying, I want District 12, right? And again, in District 12, it's vertically a lot more than a mile. They might consider more distance north and south, but less east and west. So that's why I recommend drawing it in rather than just using the radius. Then from there, you want to go through and use parameters, okay? So this is what we talked about in the previous one. You want to make it as similar as possible while still getting enough data. So this is things like searching for active, under contract, pending, and sold. I generally recommend starting out with searching for solds only within a 180-day time frame. If you can get comps within 6 months, you want that, okay? In this market, if you can get comps within 3 months, you want that. Doesn't mean you're going to be able to. You might need to go further back, and that's not a problem because you can address that with an adjustment for a market condition adjustment, but you want to get as close as possible. So start with 180 days. Next, we want to do year built. That's where we do a little bit of a bracket, right? And everybody is going to have a different opinion here. If you're doing a home that was built in 2015, you might want to go from stuff 2005 to new, or 2005 to 2022, but existing homes. Maybe you want to exclude new construction. Some people would say, I only want to go a 2-year gap, right? You get down into Old Colorado City, you might want a 70-year gap. Like you need to figure out what those are, and you'll know the markets that you're working in, you'll kind of get a feeling for what those should be, but you want to really try to put in some type of bracketing for that. You also want to choose property type. If it's a single family home, you generally want single families. If it's a condo, you might just want condos. You may want to include townhomes, just because we don't have a lot of condos here. And then the ones I really recommend are square footage, and I do it based upon total square feet. As a guideline, start 500 square feet smaller, 500 square feet bigger, and see what that gives you. Basically, when you're putting in your parameters, all you're trying to do is get a data set that's going to give you the ability to find your best comps, okay? If you put in all your criteria and it tells you have 3 results, you probably need to expand your criteria. If you have 150 or 500 or 700 results, you probably need to decrease it, right? Ideally, what I'd recommend is picking between 1 and 4 sold comps. Every appraisal is going to have 3 sold comps, 2 listing comps minimum, unless there's no listing comps like there has been the last 6 months. But I would recommend when you're trying to price a property, following those same guidelines. Try to get 3 or 4 sold comps. Try to get 1 or 2 listing comps, and use that to be able to give you a good analysis. Like I said, as far as market size, I'd recommend shoot for 120. That'd be 10 properties per month. If you're looking at 365 days, shoot for 120 properties in that. If it gets much smaller than that, you might need to increase your market size by changing up your criteria. If it gets much bigger than that, you need to tighten up the criteria, okay? If you're somewhere in that 50 to 200 range, you're going to have a pretty good data set. You're going to be able to find the best comparables. And the reality is sometimes there just aren't good comps, right? Like we all know that. There's times you put it and you're looking for comps for a property and like there just aren't good comps. You got to pick the best of what's available. So, you know, a lot of times I meet with agents and they'll be told like, well, there are no comps. Like, I understand that, but like I still have to find comps, right? I still have to come up with comps to put in an appraisal. And so for you to be best prepared for what to expect in appraisal, you want to do the same thing. Pick the best comps. They might be junk, but they still might be the best comps. And so you want to know what those are.
For rural properties, how do you address that? I mean, like if you're looking at a subdivision, easy to do all day long, but more for rural, how do you address that?
So rural, there's less regulations. When you're doing in town, that mile guideline is a little bit stricter, right? Again, it's just a guideline, but it's flexible. Rural, there's really no guidelines. So like you could be miles away. In that case, you want to really focus on the factors like what does the property have? Is it agricultural? Does it allow, does it have water rights? What type of outbuildings are on the property? That sort of stuff. And use that to determine what you're going to search for. You're going to have a much bigger map area drawn in,
Right.
and then you're going to still want to use your, narrow stuff down as best as possible. Again, with that, because the properties are so unique, you're going to have a wide range, right? If I go to Lorson Ranch and I'm searching for, my subject property is a 2,000 square foot, 2-story on a crawl space, I'm going to get a lot of the same properties. If I go search for something on 40 acres with 3 barns and, a secondary residence, like I'm not going to get good similar properties. Again, you got to just try to get the best you can and then use it to make the adjustments from there. All right, so kind of brings up the question of why didn't the appraiser use my comps? I'm giving comps. I'm giving comps on a lot of properties, and I sometimes use them. I sometimes don't. I always look at them. I know a lot of agents will say, I tried to give the appraiser my comps and they got pissed at me. Well, I don't have anything to say about that. Unfortunately, some people are just going to get mad. If I ever work with you, you can give me as many comps as you want, and I will be happy to look at all of them. I may not use a single one of them, but I will look at every single one of them and see if it is a better comp. My goal at the end of the day is to use the best comps available. I don't care if it came from me. I don't care if it came from you. I don't care if the homeowner gave it to me. If it's the best comp, it's the best comp. It should be used. The thing about it is that there are appraisers and agents sometimes look at things a little bit differently. I'm going to look at it a lot of times a little bit more from an analytical standpoint. I'm looking at things that I'm seeing in my head. What adjustments is this one going to take? A lot of times you're looking at it more from a marketability perspective and saying this offers a similar feel or a similar, desire or whatever. And so that is great, and I love to see those comps because I may have ignored those. But then when I get into the actual adjustments of it, sometimes those ones that looked good on the surface no longer look good, right? I have to make the adjustments for size. I have to make the adjustments for time. I have to make all these adjustments. And so sometimes what looks good on the initial output really looks bad once you put it in and put the numbers behind it. And so that's what I'm saying here. The comps that you provided may have seemed good, but when the appraiser put them in and made the adjustments, they may have been worse, right? So if my comps all have adjusted value, like adjustment percentages of like 3%, 5%, 8%, and the comp you gave me has an adjusted percentage of 21%, I'm not going to use it. It's not a better comp than what I have. So sometimes you may see an appraisal and you're like, what the heck? Like I gave them 4 or 5 comps. It doesn't mean that they didn't work them up. They may have, and they may have just not been found to be better comps. There will be times that they won't have gotten worked up. And again, there's not much I can say about that. Like you just have to present what you have and then hope for the best. All right, so when it comes to adjustments, there is some differences in the way that, I'm just going to put all these out, the way that I'm going to look at things maybe compared to the way that a typical CMA is done. One of the things I find is, let me ask this question. Who here does a CMA when they do a listing presentation? Okay. Who here makes adjustments to that CMA? Okay. Honestly, I would say the ones that I'm given, it's less than 10% that a single adjustment has been made. And of the ones that have adjustments made, most of them are very minimal adjustments. And the common thing that I find is when I talk to agents, I'm told, well, I don't even know how to start making adjustments. You guys don't have systems and software and stuff that allows you to do it the same way we do, right? The CMA tools available to you are not that great, which is why I created my own, because I started using them. I was like, this is really frustrating. And so there's just differences in what is typically done. If you're doing a CMA, you need to be making adjustments, so then it comes down to what adjustments should you be making. There's a lot of different adjustments. If you look down an appraisal grid, there's all sorts of fields. The things up here in blue are the things I recommend the most. So that is time of sale. So if a property sold 3 months ago, it needs an adjustment, right? We haven't been in a stable market in forever. So it needs an adjustment. Location is another, so I'll go through the blue ones first. Time of sale is a big one. That's probably the biggest adjustment that makes a difference in properties. Condition. So many times I'm given comps, and the condition of them, like they're fully renovated, and the subject property is not renovated, and the CMA I'm given has no adjustment for condition. Okay. GLA, so gross living area, above grade square footage, basement square footage, and basement finished square footage. Again, one of the things I find is a problem a lot of times is I'll be given adjustments. I'll be told these comps support my value. But what gets missed is there's a 500 square foot difference in above grade square footage. There's a 500 square foot difference in basement square footage, and the basement of the comp is finished and the basement of the subject is not. Like those things become big. Like it's, death by 1,000 cuts, right? I've been given ones that initially look great, and then you're like, well, there's a $30,000 time adjustment, and then there's, $20,000 in GLA adjustments and $15,000 in basement adjustments, and then it's got stucco and the subject didn't. It has central AC and the subject didn't. It has a walkout basement and the subject didn't. So when you factor in all those things, next thing you know, that comp that you were like, this is a really good comp. It's 4 houses over, like it seems good. Now all of a sudden is not good at all. And so it's important to take into consideration as many of these adjustments as possible. Time adjustments, like I said, are the most important because the market is changing, right? We all know location is important, but time adjustments, that same house that sold 6 months ago, let's look at this recently. May, the house that sold in May versus today, way different, right? That same house, if it sold last November, way different, maybe in the other direction. And so one of the things that gets missed a lot with time adjustment is time adjustments. They just don't get applied. And I've seen it to the positive and the negative. I've been given ones that's like, hey, these comps are great comps. They're 550, 555, 560. We listed at 565, we got an offer. It's like, well, it was a 24% increasing market. This house would have appraised for 610. But no time adjustments were made. And so that value gets missed. In a decreasing market, it goes the opposite way. Like 550, 555, 560, it's a 24% decreasing market. This house can only appraise for 530. You know what I mean? If you miss those adjustments, they can be really big.
Can I just ask you, what adjustment are you using now from a comp that sold in May versus today?
It's a good question. It's different every single time. Okay? And here's, I've made adjustments everywhere from a positive like 26% to a negative 35%. Yeah, so that told you absolutely nothing. I get that. So I'll talk about that a little bit more. So here's the problem. So most times you see a time adjustment, what you're asking for is a yearly quoted statistic. You see PPAR or CAR put up a thing saying home prices are increasing 12%. Okay, the problem with that is that statistic is year over year. It means that in October of 2021, median home price was X, and in October of 2022, median home price was X. That tells us nothing about what happened in the middle, and it's looking at a segment. If you get narrow and you say what was the median home price in Cordera, 2 stories between 3,200 and 3,700 square feet in those 2 months, you're probably not even going to have enough data to like come up with a number, okay? And then if you zoom out and say, well, what did Colorado Springs do? Well, now we're factoring in everything. So like, it's a problem. You have to be able to analyze it at a more granular level to figure out what that is. Okay, so like I said here, example, a 12% time adjustment would be 1% per month. We break it down per day. So if I'm looking at a comp and it sold 60 days ago, I was going to get a 2% time adjustment in this scenario. You're going to take that 2% multiplied by the home price, and you're going to get your adjustment value. What's interesting is, and I'll say up until recently, we've been in linear markets for the most part. We haven't had changes. So up until recently, I would say almost all of my adjustments until May were all the same. And I run a statistical analysis to come up with a method to calculate what this percentage is. That's much more in depth, but like it would give me, I'd apply the same thing, 15%, I'd apply it to every comp, okay? The last couple months, I've had to change that. And now I'm applying adjustments based upon each comp individually where it falls into the year. So I might be adjusting comp 1 and comp 2 that sold in May down because, well, home prices have dropped since May. But that comp that I have to use that sold last January, it's still up compared to today. And so it's important to be able to analyze and figure out where is that price. Now, applying a time adjustment at all, whether you use the statistics from CAR or PPAR, or whether you calculate them yourself, as long as you have a reason why you're getting it, if you apply those time adjustments across multiple comparables, you're at least going to get a better idea of value and what the market was than if you didn't do that. You're going to see properties go up and down and all that. And the idea is if you've got comps here, here, and here, that once you apply adjustments, not just time adjustments, but all of them, that it brings these properties closer together. If you're making adjustments and it's moving that range further apart, you know it's not a good adjustment. It's as simple as that, honestly. But like I said, this is one of the biggest and most important ones. Square footage adjustments, this is another one I'm asked about all the time. How do I come up with how much to give for square footage adjustment? And there's a number of methods. I'm going to go through these ones pretty quick. Price per square foot, that's junk, don't use it. I can't tell you the amount of times I've been told houses in this neighborhood sell for $250 a square foot. My house is 500 square feet bigger. I took $250 times 500 square feet, and I added it to the price, took it off from the price. It happens shockingly a lot. It doesn't work. Paired sale analysis, this is a great idea. You'd find two nearly identical properties, right? They have the same conditions, the same amenities. You sold at the same date. They had the same size lot in the same neighborhood, but one's 100 square feet bigger. What was the difference in price? It was $12,000 divided by the extra square footage. That could give you it. The problem with this method, there's no such thing as a paired sale. You know what I mean? Like there's always factors. There's always 2, 3, 4 variables. If you go back to high school or whatever and go to, I don't even know what it was, algebra maybe, and you're solving for X, you need one variable. It becomes very difficult when you're sitting there and saying, I'm solving for a bunch. That's what I do every day in my appraisals, and it is very difficult. And there's a lot of testing involved, So if you're just looking at it and you're just saying, I'm only focusing on price on the square footage, and you're ignoring those others, you could be inaccurately assigning value to the square footage that wasn't actually part of that. And then there's statistical analysis. There's 2 types. Multiple linear regression. I don't know if anyone in here took like a statistics class in college. Unless you're a really, really big numbers nerd like myself, you're going to just not want to use it. It doesn't make sense. And to be honest, it doesn't work with real estate. The idea of multiple linear regression is it's taking all the data and it's examining all of those variables all at the same time, and it's coming up with values for them. The problem with that is in real estate, there's a struggle between quality of data and amount of data. The more search results I get in my search, if I get 500 results, they're less similar. Therefore, if I run a statistical analysis on 500 not similar properties, the resulting numbers aren't going to be very good. But if I run that same multiple linear regression on 6 properties, I don't have enough data, statistically speaking, to actually come up with a value that works. So there's some different companies that have tried to do this. It's never really worked, and it's very confusing. And from a legal perspective, I know like in my appraising, if I don't know how to explain it, I shouldn't use it. Same thing with you guys. If you're like, I don't know what that means, I can't explain it. If I get sued by my client 5 years from now because I advise them to do X, and they're like, well, where'd you come up with the price? And you're like, I use this method. And they're like, how does that work? And you're like, I don't know. You know, you're in trouble. So that's why I didn't use that method. The last one is hedonic regression. And this is kind of the way your brain's already working. You're probably already doing this without knowing it. It's contributory value. You walk into a house and you say, well, the land's worth something, right? The foundation's worth something. The below grade basement's worth something. The finished basement's worth something. All the amenities are worth something. Above grade, it all factors in, okay? And so this is the method I recommend. And to help you get a general idea of how to do this quickly, let's say you run, remember I said price per square foot's not good? It's not good when you're applying it directly. Where it is good is to take the market price per square foot. So if I have 100 results, I take the market price per square foot, so the median price of that entire market, let's say it's $200 a square foot, and I break it into 6 categories. I break it into land, unfinished basement, finished basement, above grade, garage, and amenities. This hits every aspect of a house, okay? And then I assign a percentage to those of what they contribute. You can see here some example percentages. Land, 20%, okay? That comes from the assessor. Here in Colorado Springs, the assessor views land in the typical neighborhood worth 20% of the total value of a property. Townhomes are 15. As you get to like larger properties, more expensive properties, it gets like 25 or 30. We use 20 as a starting point. Unfinished basement, I do 8. Finished basement, 12. Above grade, 30. Garage, 20. And amenities, 10. These are my starting points on every appraisal I do. They change all the time, okay? And the way that they change is when I actually do my analysis, I figure out, hey, I'm giving an adjustment for above grade, and it's too big or it's too small, and I come back and I adjust that up or down, okay? But if you wanted to just get a good starting point to say, I'm listing this property, how much should I make for an adjustment for square footage? Try these numbers and at least start there, okay? So this would mean that if it's $200 a square foot, your land is $40 of that. The value of the land is attributed to $40 of every dollar per square foot of a property in that market. Unfinished basement is 16, finished is 24, above grade 60, garage is 40, and amenities are 20. Ignore, you can see down here, land, garage, and amenities. Kind of ignore those because those take additional calculations to figure out like, what the heck does this mean? Does that mean land's worth $40 per square foot? No, it does not. It means that if your house is 2,000 square feet and therefore it's worth $200 a square foot, it means $40 of that 200 is attributed to that land. But now I have to take that and go more in depth. So if you want to learn more about how to do that, I'd be happy to help you with that someday. It's too in depth to jump into here. The ones to focus on are above grade, finished basement, and unfinished basement, okay? If you broke this out and then you made adjustments in this type of range, you're gonna be much closer to determining good adjustments for that property, okay? Like I said, too many times I'm given things where people say use the whole amount, or they'll say, I was told $30 by an appraiser 30 years ago, or I was told it's $50 or whatever, and I use it on every single property. Well, what this is worth in a $350,000 property versus a $2.5 million property, it has to be different, right? And most people use the same thing because you don't know where to go. So try this method out, and it will definitely help you get a lot closer. Again, these are starting points, so you may need to tweak it, but at least for your perspective, this is going to get you a really good starting point where you're going to have a better idea of how to move forward.
How do we know to tweak it?
Okay, the good question. So,
How do we know what value to tweak it to?
yeah. So let's say a quick example would be you have your subject property is 2,000 square feet. You have a couple comps that are 1,500 square feet, a couple comps that are 2,500. Okay. Let's say everything else was similar, like you weren't going to have to make any other adjustments. I know this is not always the case, but for illustration purposes, if I'm making an adjustment for the 1,500 square foot ones, they have to come up in value because they're smaller, and the 2,500 square foot have to come down in value. If I make the adjustment and it's here to here, and I get to here, it needs to be bigger. If I get to here, it needed to be smaller. If I flip-flopped where they were, the bigger ones started out more expensive, The smaller ones started out less expensive, and I have flip-flopped them. Now I know I made too much of an adjustment, okay? So if you were adjusting at $60 a square foot, so 500 square feet in each direction, you're making a $30,000 adjustment in each direction. Theoretically, you'd want to see that the two that were smaller came up 30 grand, the two that were bigger came down 30 grand, and they're now in line, okay? Now, you have other things to factor in, like views and locations and all that. But ideally, if you're looking at 4 to 6 comps, you're going to have at least a couple of them that have a lot of similarities, especially if you're in a neighborhood with a lot of similar properties. And so you're going to be able to see, did my range get closer, or did it flip-flop, or did it not get close enough, right? I did at $30 a square foot, and now it's like, well, they came closer, but like it still needs to be a lot more, and I don't have anything else to adjust. Now maybe you need to go up from the 30% to 35% or 40% or something like that. So it's kind of a little bit of trial and error. There's not a great way to do it. You know, it does take a little bit of trial and error. Now, what I will say is, like, I know when I go into certain neighborhoods I've done thousands of appraisals in, I know what percentage I'm most likely going to be at, right? So I know in certain neighborhoods I'm automatically going to go from 30% to 25%. I also know other neighborhoods I'm automatically going to go to 35% because I've done enough valuations in that neighborhood that I've seen that trend. So the first time you do it, you're not going to have a great answer, right? You're going to just take it, apply it, see what happens, and then time 3, time 5, time 10, like you're going to automatically be like, hey, I should probably change this earlier. That way I don't test out a bunch of numbers that don't apply. So ultimately, if you do that, if you pick comps that way where you're getting the best comparable properties, if you make at least some adjustments, time adjustment and square footage adjustments, I'd recommend at minimum making those two, you're going to come up with a value. The next thing that's important to talk about really fast is there's a difference between market value and appraisal value. Now, the appraisal says it's the opinion of market value, and in a perfect world, they're the same. But in a rapidly increasing or decreasing market, there is going to be a difference, right? The last 9 months, you were able to sell a house for way more than it could be appraised for, right? The appraisal was lagging. Today, I'm coming in high on literally every appraisal I do because of the data supports a higher value than your buyer wants to pay. And so it's important to understand the difference between the two and know what that means for you. If you analyze a property, you pick good comps, you make some adjustments, and you say this house should be worth 500 grand. You know the market and your buyers and your sellers, you know better than an appraiser does what you're likely to get it under contract for. So what does that mean for you? If you know it can only appraise for 500, but you can get it under contract for 600, like the last 9 months, you need an appraisal gap, or you need to prepare your clients that like they're not going to get that value if it's a loan, or they might not get the value. They might, but they might not get the value. You need to prepare them that way. And then the same thing in the current market is preparing your clients to say like, yeah, like I understand these sales are here, and here's where we're thinking it will adjust to, and here's where I think it's going to appraise. But there's 20 other properties very similar on the market. So we're going to have to, you need to decide what you're willing to take for this house because it's probably not what the appraised value is right now. You know, we do the best we can to mimic. My job as an appraiser is not to come up with what my adjustments are or what I think something's worth. My job is to figure out what the market shows it's worth and make the appraisal value match that. And again, in a perfect market, they'd be identical. In the real world, they're not identical. So it's just important to know the difference. You know, years ago, Joe Clement said to my dad, he got in an argument about a house he came in low on, I think, and he said to my dad, like, the value of a house, or the value of a property is what somebody is willing to pay, right? It's the definition of market value. That's very true. Doesn't mean the bank wants to lend on it. Just because one person's willing to pay whatever doesn't mean that the bank thinks that everybody would pay that. You know, I've done a number of appraisals this last year where people paid over $100,000 above the appraised value because that person was willing to pay it. I've done multiple where the only offer was $100,000 over value. Nobody else even wanted it at the list price, but the buyer wanted it at an insane price. So that was the market value in that scenario, but it doesn't mean it's the appraised value. So it's just important to remember the difference between those. We kind of already went through this. What contributes to value? The GLA, basement square footage, condition, the amenities. A lot of times people forget things like central AC, fireplaces, stucco exteriors, walkout basements. We all know that updating contributes to value. The amount of updating makes a big difference. And there's just a certain point of updating that you're never going to get the value anyway, right? You put a $200,000 kitchen, you're not going to get it, you know. Maybe in a multi-million-dollar house, but in a normal house, you're not going to get it. You know, location, views, bedroom count. This one's one that I want to point out. Bedroom count is something a lot of times I'm presented with. Like, this is a 4-bedroom house. It's worth more than all these comps. They're 3 bedrooms. Generally, we find there's no additional value for bedrooms. It's more based on square footage. Unless there's an adequate number of bedrooms for the market. If the market is like, this is a place, family with kids, everybody has multiple kids, a 1-bedroom house does have a decreased value. 1 bedroom is the only scenario where I consistently see a decreased value. 2 and more bedrooms, it could go both ways, right? A 3-bedroom house with a den is to a lot of people worth the same thing as a 4-bedroom house. You know, I had one the other day that I was working on for a divorce situation where they made it a 6-bedroom house in a neighborhood that only has 4-bedroom homes. And one party felt that it was worth a lot more because it's a 6-bedroom. Well, the market doesn't deem that anybody wants a 6-bedroom. It's square footage. They weren't even using it as 6 bedrooms. They were using it as 4 bedrooms, like a TV room and a study. You know what I mean? So like the other houses that hadn't had that converted, it would have been a family room right there that you could have used as a TV room and a study. Like it generally doesn't matter. But if it's an adequate number, it does matter. So that's important to know. Bathroom count, generally they add value. You know, if you want a general number to go with, start with like in a normal price range, $8,000 for a full bathroom, $4,000 for a half bathroom. Higher prices go 10 and 5 or 12 and 6. And again, you have to test it. Just because it's a starting point doesn't mean it's going to be valid. If I've got 5 comps and one of them has an extra bathroom and I apply a $10,000 adjustment and it drops it below all the other comps by $4,000, I know that it should have been a $6,000 adjustment, not a $10,000, because I've now taken what was superior and higher in price and I've pushed it past the bottom of where the other ones were. So that's how I confirm every adjustment I make is, does it move me closer? Does it move me farther? Does it flip-flop things? One of the things that you need to know about, that I get asked a lot of questions about, is how do I fight a low appraisal? There are a couple different ways. There's a couple things you need to know. First of all, you have to present it to the lender. You can't come to the appraiser. I get phone calls all the time or emails all the time saying, here's my comps, please use these, add these. I can't do it. Even if I don't have a problem doing it, I'm literally not allowed to do it. I can't reopen the file without the lender reopening it for me. So you have to present it to the lender. You also should give details as to why the comps that you're presenting are better. Ideally, you'd present them in a grid format like is in an appraisal with adjustments to it, where you're saying you used comps that were at 10% adjustments, 12% adjustments, 15%, and here's one that is at 6%. This is a better comp. It makes it easy on me, and not that I need you to make it easy on me, but like as an appraiser, if I'm given that data and it's already been adjusted, how much more likely am I? I'm going to look at it regardless, but like how much more likely am I to do it when it's presented that way, right? It makes it easier, because I'm going to tell you right now, like I don't get phone calls from lenders saying, hey, we need you to do this when it's convenient to you. I get a phone call like, hey, we have a revision. You have 8 hours to get it back to us. Otherwise, your scorecard with us drops, okay? So it's like a panic thing. Like the easier you make it on me, the more likely I'm going to get it done quick and try to get it back to you.
And you have a copy of that grid example for us?
I can send one to you. You could look ultimately at an appraisal also, but like I can get you a copy and send it in to Lori. So there's 4 ways to fight them. First one is to request factual changes. This one's easy. most of the time it gets caught by the lender, right? I make the adjustment the wrong direction on accident. So I make a negative $20,000 adjustment instead of a positive. It's a factual error. It needs to be corrected. I say something is 1,200 square feet and it's actually 2,200 square feet, right? These are rare because I review my process, my assistant reviews it, it goes to somebody through an AMC that reviews it, and then it goes to the lender and they review it. So it's unlikely to see these, but it happens. So if you ever are looking through your appraisal and you're like, what the heck? Like, they ignored the fact that mine had a 3-car garage. They said it had a 2-car garage. And we're 3,000 low, and they adjusted all the comps down $8,000. Like, that's a factual error. Easy to get fixed. Just present that to the lender. Here's an error. That'll get fixed automatically. The next one is providing comps. This is what you are already most likely doing, right? You're providing your comps and saying, I think these ones should be considered. I think that they were missed. Again, it doesn't mean that the appraiser didn't already look at them. I look at anywhere between like 10 and 15 comps a lot of times. So you may present me with some and say, hey, I want you to look at this. I may have already done so. I'll easily just respond to the lender with a revision saying that's already been considered. It was not included for this reason. Or it may come to me and I may say, I didn't use that one. It's a good one. I'd be happy to put it in. So your comps and their adjustments. Again, ideally you'd put it in a grid. You'd use the adjustments they already use. So if they use $50 per square foot, whether you agree with it or not, you use that adjustment, and if it dictates that it's a better comp based on their adjustments, then you have a good case. The last two are a lot less likely, but I'm going to tell you them anyway. Their comps and your adjustments, this would be like you going and saying, you did not make good adjustments, and I think you ignored this. And you would have to have reason. Now this you're going to be presenting to the lender, and the lender is then going to be going back and probably asking for clarification as to why they used the adjustments that they used. This is most likely not going to result in anything super positive. The only thing it might result in is like maybe the lender says like, you know what, let's order a second appraisal if the loan allows for it. Not every program does. The last one is your comps and your adjustments, where you're saying you didn't pick good comps and you didn't use good adjustments, and here's what it should be. Again, you're approaching more likely the lender in that case if you know that there's the option to order a new appraisal and you're saying, look, here's why we think this is a bad appraisal. I'm sure lenders have heard a ton of times from agents, this appraisal sucks and I want a new one. And maybe it does, or maybe it doesn't. But if you can go to the lender and say, here's why I don't like it, and I have reason to show you why I don't like it. These ones all had what I feel are better adjustments that are supported this way, and they're lower gross adjustment percentages, and they come in at value. Like, you have a better case to the lender of maybe why they should consider ordering a new appraisal or whatever. Or it gives you a way to go to your buyer and say, hey, maybe we should look at another lender if this lender can't do it. Maybe we need to go to another lender and try to get another appraisal ordered, because I think it's more likely it'll come in like this next time. Did I just kill it? Okay. Really quick, I'm going to go through one or two things, and then we'll jump into talking about solar. If you need help with any of this stuff, there's two ways we can help you. First is through Prewitt Appraisals. We are going to be doing some limited scope and full appraisals for pre-listings at a discounted value. So it's 25% off. So if you're like sitting there and you're saying like, I've got one, I just don't know what to do. I want a second set of eyes on this. Like it's not making sense or whatever. We'd be happy to do that for you. Limited scope means I'm not coming to the property. You're going to send me photos. You're going to send me details, and I'm going to do what's considered a desktop appraisal. Okay, I can have it back to you in probably 48 hours. And that value is going to be based upon what you provide me. So if you provide me something that turns out to be false, my value is based upon that, okay? The other one is a full scope appraisal. That's a normal appraisal. We would come do a full inspection, our own photos, our own measurements, all that, and that'd be $450. And then we can always help with cash purchases if you need it. If you want to learn more about some of the stuff I'm talking to you about today, the second company that I have is Property Brain. And the goal behind that company is to help educate, teach this kind of stuff, and design and build tools that do this for you to make it easy. So you can visit our website at propertybrain.io/agents, and we have blog posts on there. We've got tools. The comp adjuster tool is essentially everything that I do in my appraisal it's a software as a service product. It lets you go through, import your data, do all this stuff. You can do in probably 10 minutes, and you could come up with a value that is the same type of value I'm going to come up with. There's just not there's not like anything like that. So that's why we built it. I built it for myself, and then finally decided like maybe I should make it available to others. So I just want to tell you about those. And then let's take a few, see if there's any questions about this, and then we're going to talk about solar, and then if you have questions about that, which I'm sure you will, we can dive into those. So any solar questions, let's save those. But any questions about this that you want me to address?
Can I get a copy of the presentation?
Yep.
So when I first started, I had this whole worksheet, and the person gave us, okay, you do this amount,
Yep.
this and that, and then I was told, oh gosh, you never do that.
Yep.
But do you think that's a good starting point with some of those?
Yep.
You know,
So I always say
like
this.
You're just saying bathrooms 4 versus
Yep.
8,000, that kind of thing.
The rule of thumb, so I talked to the same topic I talked to appraisers about, right? I know a lot of appraisers who have been using the same rule of thumb for square footage adjustments or garages or whatever for 30 years. And they'll say, I use $35 a square foot. I joke about that because I literally know a ton of them that use $35 a square foot. Every property, no matter what price, no matter where in the city, okay? Having a rule of thumb to start with is not the problem. Staying with your rule of thumb, regardless of what it does to the comps, is the problem, okay? So what I showed you today helps you hopefully be able to come up with a rule of thumb. If you don't want to use this method and you just want to say, I'm going to come up with my own, fine. Start with something, okay? And see what it does to the properties and adjust from there. I don't care if you start off with $200 a square foot or $12 a square foot. You're going to see very quickly when you apply it to your comps, like that one wasn't valid and that one wasn't valid, and let me get somewhere in the middle. So again, whether you want, if you have an old thing that you want to start with, great, go ahead and start with it. And then start making notes to yourself, like, hey, when I'm in Lorson, I'm noticing like square footage seems to be, when I make adjustments, like it seems to be, $64 a foot. Like let me make that my new starting point. And it'll be different a month from now or 6 months from now, but at least gives you somewhere to start.
Real quick, so when I'm doing a comp, I typically stay within the subdivision, but I've had not issues on the listing side, but on the buy side where the agent will go far out from that.
Yep.
What would be the reasoning behind that?
So if you're in a subdivision, let's say you're in Banning, Lewis, okay? It's more likely that if I'm doing an appraisal and the subject property is in Banning, that I'm most likely searching only in Banning. It's a pretty big neighborhood. It's got a decent amount of data. It has amenities that are unique compared to some of the surrounding areas. I'm going to start my search there. Doesn't mean I'm not going to go to Indigo Ranch or to something else. It's fine to use a comp from outside the neighborhood, but you then need to see, does it make a difference? I had a family member of mine was selling their house and they lived in Summerfield, and their agent used all comps that were in Pine Creek. Not a single one in Summerfield, only Pine Creek, priced accordingly. This was in 2020, it didn't matter, right? They got like an extra 80 grand or something anyway. It made me look like an idiot because I'm like, there's no shot you're selling your house for that, and they did. So, you have to know what market you're in, but in that case, it's not a problem if you're in Summerfield to go to Pine Creek if you need to. There's gonna be a price difference, and you need to, so like, what's a problem is when you only go to another neighborhood. If you're in Banning and you have 2 comps in Banning and 2 in Indigo, you're gonna see when you make some of these other adjustments for square footage and time adjustments and stuff that you're like, the ones in Banning tend to be X percent, 5%, 10% higher or lower than the other neighborhood. So then feel free to use the other comp, just make sure you make an adjustment for it.
What kind of adjustment do you make when you have amenities, Indigo versus Banning?
I do it based more on the location. I don't adjust for the individual amenity. I would again look at if my adjusted comps in Indigo are coming in at 500 grand and my adjusted comps in Indigo are coming in at 485, I'm gonna make a $15,000 adjustment to the Indigo comps and say it's a inferior area, so they need to come up 15,000, which would get them all to 500. I'm not going to go in and make an adjustment and say like, well, it has a pool and a clubhouse and blah, 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 and that is worth it. That's generally dealt with by the HOA, and the Banning has a higher, well, it's a metro district, but has a higher fee than Indigo, and so that's kind of offsetting. But the presence of them in that neighborhood helps dictate the neighborhood's value, and so, yeah, so I'm going to look at, and And that's why, again, it's also tough when you only have one comp somewhere. So like if I'm gonna go out of my neighborhood, I might pick 2 comps out of my neighborhood, right? Because now if I see like Banning is adjusting to 500 and 501 and Indigo's adjusting to 485 and 486, I know a $14,000 or $15,000 adjustment would make both of them fall in line. It kind of confirms that adjustment. If I go to the one in Indigo and it's like I only have one and it's $14,000, like, was it just that house that sold for $14,000 lower, or was it that neighborhood that dictated lower?
Knowing what we've seen in the market lately, out of all the appraisals you've done in the last 60 days,
Yeah.
what percentage of those are you seeing that you're lower than the contract price? Because what I'm seeing, and when I'm out doing my
Yeah.
talking to people, they're always going back saying, well, this house over here, February,
Yeah.
you know, so sellers are trying to hold on to that
Yeah.
seller market. I'm curious, what are you seeing?
I would say, from what I've seen recently, basically every comp that has sold in April, May, June is going to be higher than I could support. I'm giving decreasing percentage time adjustments to every single one, almost in every case. There's been a few rare ones, but for things that sold in April, May, June, like there was clearly a peak in May. But here's the important thing. If in April you had asked me what the time adjustment was, it may have been 25% over the last year. I had one area, this is insane. I had one area, I gave a 58% time adjustment, and I came in low on the contract price. This was like sometime middle of last year. It was moving so crazy at points that like it was just unsupportable, right? But like if you look at it and said, if I looked at a year-over-year statistic, or if I looked at my trend the way I do it, from last year this time until April, there was a big increase, right? February was less of an increase or whatever. But like if I then look from where we are now and I go backwards, let's say by February it got up to a median of like 440, and now it's at a median of 460. It might seem like, well, we're in a decreasing market. A home that sold in February should be worth less today. And it might not be. I might still have to say, like, if I go back, the further I go back, the more likely I'm still increasing. The market went up and it's come back down, but it hasn't come all the way back down. So the further away you go with a comp, the more likely it still requires an increase. It's just less than it would have been a couple months ago. The closer the comp gets to here, I haven't used a comp that has sold in the last 60 days or maybe 90 days that has required an increasing time adjustment in a few months, right? We all know that they're going down. And the trend is actually quite massive. Like most areas, I would say the 3-month trend is around 50% decrease. It won't be 50% because it will level out, right? But like that's where we're at. So if you're using that, it's important to remember that, especially if you're going to use a singular time adjustment, like I talked about. If you said, I'm going to go 2%, right? Car says it's 4%. I'm going to go 4%, okay? So one that sold 8 months ago is going to get 4%. It's going to get 8/12 of 4% because it's going to break it down per month. And one that sold a month ago is going to get 1/12 of 4%. You're most likely going to find that the one that was farther away didn't adjust up enough, and the one that was recent adjusted up too much, because you most likely need to start looking at it from a perspective of like, this one sold 6 months ago, it's increasing. This one sold a month ago, it's decreasing. So.
This kind of goes back in time a little bit
Yeah.
when we were increasing. So historically, condos and townhomes don't increase as much.
Right.
But how do you treat a neighborhood? Because this happened to us where there hadn't been any sales like at all.
Yeah.
And here we are in this market where values are up 20%.
Yep.
But how do you give them value if there's no sales for like a year or something?
Yeah.
It's like those should still be higher. I had one that came in where they didn't even appraise it higher than a house that had appraised a year ago.
Oh, wow.
Well, how do we?
Yeah.
How do you
So
find something like that?
that goes back to the picking comps, right? So like in that scenario, I have no comps in my immediate area. So now I have to expand my search until I get data so that I can actually run a statistical analysis on it. And so I may have to, instead of being a mile, I might have to be 7 miles, and I might have to be much bigger or much smaller. I need to get some form of data. I want to keep it as narrow as possible, but I still need data. And so in that scenario, what should have been done is that you would go back or go further and say, like, what is the market doing as a whole. Maybe if I'm only looking at condos, maybe I now include townhomes. If I'm only including a certain size range, maybe I get bigger, or maybe again, if I was only looking in a certain map parameters, maybe I increase that and say, well, okay, nothing in here sells. So like if somebody was going to look in here, and you guys know this even better than I would know this. If you have somebody that, and you're selling a house, and you're like, there hasn't been a sale in here in 4 years. Okay, well, like somebody who's looking here, if you were bringing a buyer here, where else do you think that they would go? And you need to expand your search accordingly. And then you're going to have to make that point to the appraiser of like, well, I went 4 miles, and here's why. And the appraiser is probably going to have to do the same thing. You know what I mean? So it's just important to expand your search accordingly, where you're not just getting everything, but you're saying like, I have to have something. You know what I mean? So that is what should be done, but it makes it a lot harder.
You said it a couple times. I picked up on like thinking almost like a buyer, like where else would a buyer?
100%.
If they were looking at this, like if it was rural.
Yep.
Or condo.
When it comes to valuing a property, my job is to try to think, if I'm a buyer, not a specific buyer, but a typical buyer, where would I look? What other houses would I consider? And what would I expect to pay? Again, the typical buyer might say, yeah, I'd look in Cordera and Wolf Ranch and Pine Creek and Summerfield, but they're going to expect to pay different amounts in those neighborhoods, right? They're going to expect to pay different for a house that's unrenovated versus renovated. So I want to think like a buyer to think, where do I look? How do I come up with my parameters? But then I also need to think like, I have to make adjustments to it accordingly. Because a buyer, if I show them something in Pine Creek and I show them something in Wagon Trails, they're going to expect that they're going to pay more in Pine Creek. You know what I mean? So if you pick those comps and you've got the house in Wagon Trails, and I don't ever do this, don't pick a comp in Pine Creek. But if you did, and you did not make an adjustment for being in Pine Creek, and you provide that to the appraiser and say, hey, this one supports our value. Of course it does, but it needed an adjustment. You know what I mean? So, all right, let's jump into solar. So I'll just start out by saying, as far as solar, and then I'm going to have Riley talk about solar because I don't know I don't know enough about solar, so I can't answer questions. All I can answer is from the valuation perspective. Okay, so the most important thing you need to know is that when it comes to a purchase or sale, and it is going to be financed, it most likely has to fall under Fannie Mae guidelines, whether or not it can get value and what kind of value it can get. So here, this is from Fannie Mae directly. Solar panels cannot be given value if they are leased, okay? They just flat out no value, can't be given. If they're owned, if it was a cash purchase, consumer debt not collateralized by the solar panels, or the debt, they put them on, they had debt financing but it's been paid off, then the value can be there based upon what the appraised value, market value dictates, okay? So we'll talk about that in just a second. If they're financed as a fixture to the real estate, which most are. I don't know of any that would be personal property. Maybe Riley can answer that. What's the difference between those? Then again, they could be considered. If it's personal property, it can't be considered, right? Just like you can't consider a couch as part of the value of a house. You could consider, an entertainment center that's custom built into the wall, but you can't consider one that's sitting there. So it's kind of like that. And again, Fannie Mae, their guidelines are that an adjustment or value for solar cannot be based upon the dollar for dollar basis of the equipment, meaning like it was $50,000 and therefore I'm giving $50,000. It also cannot be based upon the expected cost savings. So one of the most popular things people will say is like, well, I saved $200 a month for this, and so that should contribute to value. Fannie Mae doesn't care about that. Those are not guarantees that is the same cost savings over time. They won't let you use, like a discounted cash flow analysis to come up with it. From a numbers nerd and finance person, I feel like that should be allowed, but it's not. It can be solely based upon it cannot be solely based upon the cost or income approach. So again, you can't base it upon what it costs them to get it. It has to be based upon market reaction, which means if I have 2 comps that have solar and 2 comps that don't, and my adjusted values after I've done everything else are equal, there is no value that can be given. If I can say, here's 2 comps that both had solar, and I've adjusted them for square footage and time and all these things, and they're adjusting to $500,000, and these other 2 comps are also very good comps, they've been adjusted, and they don't have solar and they're adjusting to $480, I can now give a $20,000 adjustment for that solar, because I can say I have these 2 comps that have it, these 2 comps that don't. I've kind of created a paired sale, and now I can look at and extract that value, okay? But I'm gonna let Riley talk about more how do they fall into these categories, and what do you need to know when you are dealing with a seller, let's say, that has one that's maybe in these categories. How can they move it to one or the other or whatever? So
Absolutely. So my name is McKee. I've been knocking doors for solar out here for about 5 years in the Springs. Definitely learned a lot in the industry in that time. Been with several different companies in that time as well, kind of learning different things when it comes to panel technology, how it interacts, how long a homeowner needs to be in a home to obtain any sort of value, and make sure that they're getting the proper appraisal and making sure they can transfer everything easily over to the next buyer. So pretty much, real quick, how many of y'all have actually sat down and met with a solar consultant and looked at any sort of design for your home? Anybody in here? A couple here and there? Okay. How long I've been doing this, I've actually probably knocked on a couple of your doors in the past. I actually think you flew me the bird a couple of years ago. Yeah, so typically the way that solar is done here in the state of Colorado, there's pretty much two options for a buyer. There is the leasing option, which is the power purchase agreement or PPA, and then there is the financing and ownerships options. So primarily the way it's done is the financing or cash deals. PPAs really don't work out too well here in the state. More people want to own it. You know, the mindset is, if I'm going to put it up on my house, why wouldn't I own it and get the tax credit? So power purchase agreements have changed quite a bit here in the last, I'd say, 8 years. Before, you had to put significant down payments down, roughly $15,000 to $20,000 up front. Obviously, you don't get any of the equity out of your home, and you had to pay off a lien if you were going to move at least 10 years after the installation. So with the power purchase agreement now, everything is very easily transferred over. No one has to pay off any sort of liens on the property. And a matter of fact, one of our partners we use, they're the largest in the U.S., is Sunrun. They actually offer the homeowner to purchase the systems now, offer them 5 years after installation at a 60% discount. So if you're getting a $20,000 system after 5 years, take 60% off, you're able to purchase it from them. With financing, though, that's the normal route that we go because there is a 30% federal tax credit involved with the purchase of these systems. That actually just got passed back in the Inflation Reduction Act back in September. So you get a 30% federal tax credit off the top of whatever your system's overall value is. So obviously you do not receive that with a power purchase agreement as well. With a financing option, you get to take that as well. The only reason that we steer people towards the PPA over the financing is if they're retired and they have no taxable income whatsoever. So the PPA is still a valid option for some people. Financing is still generally the way to go because you get a locked-in rate. When it comes to selling of the home, everything is easily transferable on the financing option. There's no liens placed on the properties with the financing. You do own the panels as well. Some financiers may put a lien on top of the panels. That just means that when someone's taking over to buy the home, they just have to do a soft credit check to make sure, if they're qualifying to buy a home, they're going to qualify to purchase these systems as well. But when a finance system is transferred over to the next buyer, there's no reamortization, there's nothing like that. If someone's paying $120 a month on their solar panels, that new homeowner is going to take over at the exact same payment with the exact same principal as well. So one thing with the financing as well, there are quite a few solar financiers here in the U.S. Most of them have a large amount of options. It's between like a 15 and 30-year mortgage. There's 7 years to 25-year options for your financing period. Kind of a similar mindset between the 15 and 30-year. Whatever you're comfortable paying essentially is what it is. No early payoff penalties, anything like that. Good Leap, our largest financier, has shown that 70% of homeowners pay these systems off within 5 years after agreeing and having them installed on their property. Cash is the absolute easiest, obviously it is. There's a significant discount to homeowners for doing a cash option because you don't have to include any sort of financing fees or anything like that. And we actually are starting to look into having people apply for whoever they want to go through to do the cash price just to make everything easier on the transfer of the home as well. That way the loan's in your name. But yeah, kind of a basic overview of that. Do we have any sort of broad questions about solar? I was going to kind of get into the technology, what you're looking into for homeowners that want to look into solar for their property, kind of proper timeline of when they need to sell if they're looking to get into solar. Any kind of, yes ma'am?
Are there short-term leases?
Short-term leases?
Like we have a lot of military, so some of them come and they are expecting to be here Is there a way to have like a 3-year solar lease, or is it like a done deal, it has to be the 15 to?
So I don't work with PPAs to option out here. I don't know an incredible amount about them. Usually they have a few different terms. It's primarily just they give you that option 5 years to purchase. If you do need to transfer in that time, a lease actually is a little bit easier for shorter time frame individuals. Unless someone is going to be in their property at least 2.5 to 3 years minimum, they do not need to get solar put up on their house. If they plan on selling before 3 years, they are not going to see the proper return on investment. You'll hear a lot of solar reps say, oh yeah, you can be in the home, like you were telling me yesterday, you can be in the home for a year and receive all your equity back. You're not going to. It's just not going to make sense. You have $39,000 left on a loan, you've only had it for a year, it's just not going to get you any sort of value back that you were expecting in the first place. Did that kind of answer your question?
It did, and then I had a follow-up question. If they are purchased, and say they were purchased 6 years ago, and they're paid off, you can add that value to the home. If they want to get it replaced, like would they go through the same vendor and maybe get a discount, or they're just going a whole new system completely?
So you're saying if the seller took over and wanted to update their system, or you're saying the buyer wanted a new system on their next property?
Say the seller paid off that current system, and the buyer comes in, they want solar, but it's 6 years old, so maybe they need something newer. Like how long is the technology on these panels left?
So that kind of breaks up into the tiers. So one thing with your buyers as well, when you look at a system, any buyer you're having that is looking to purchase a system, if they do purchase, make sure they save their proposal. So that way we know the panels, we know what type of panels, the efficiency on the panels. So there's tier 1 and tier 2 panels. Most everything out here is going to be tier 1. There's going to be a few companies that maybe are just getting started that can't afford the overhead of the tier 1 panels. And so tier 1 panels, there's pretty much two kinds. There's monocrystalline panels, which is what you'll see mostly here in the Springs. It's that matte black panel. It's one solid shard of silicone crystal. That's also what makes them hail resistant. We have to use those in these markets. But these things also have roughly 40-year lifespan on the panels. You'll see a very low degradation every single year on these things. Polycrystalline panels are kind of what you'll see like Harbor Freight and stuff like that. Those blue ones with the chrome border, crumble like paper underneath hail. You might get 15, 20 years out of those if you're lucky. So that's if someone just bought a home with a tier 1 system on there, those panels are going to be good for a long time. Most of them are warranted for 25 years as well, with production for 30 years. So yeah, you shouldn't have to do any sort of updates. The only thing that there's kind of two differences also with solar is inverters. I won't get too much into details, but there's a string inverter and then micro inverters. String is everything is lined up to one single inverter, converting from DC to AC energy. A little bit more efficient just by a couple of percentage to micro inverters. But if that one component goes out, then you'll have to update it because your whole system is down in that case. And we're actually seeing a big back order of 6 months. So if somebody's string inverter shoots out, your solar system's not going to be producing for at least 6 months. Micro inverters, each panel has its own brain pretty much. It's converting the energy right on the spot, and it's very easy to diagnose and monitor systems that way as well. One thing I do recommend, because I have people that I talk to frequently that they want to consult their real estate agent and their tax advisors before they make any sort of decision, which I do recommend as well. If you have anyone approach you, tell them to get at least 3 bids before they actually end up settling on any sort of one particular, because there's very good solar companies out here. There's also some that aren't in here for obviously the homeowner's best interest. So you want to make sure to vet anyone that you're going to be looking into, that you're going to be working with, that you're going to be recommending to other people, because it's very easy. There's no regulation in this market right now. There is hardly any whatsoever to speak of other than the tax credit. That's about the only thing that's regulated. If you have someone sign up for the tax credit, they're not installed yet, but they file it for this year's taxes and then they cancel, obviously they're going to be in trouble, but that's about the only regulation there is in solar right now.
What impact does it have on your homeowner's insurance?
So homeowners insurance, actually federally, homeowners insurance now pretty much, except for the smallest firms, cover it. It just increases your home's overall value since you do own the system. So you can expect, USA is typically the most expensive. I think they've gone down anywhere from like $3 to $11 a month higher than your monthly homeowner's insurance payment, just because obviously your property has more liability now.
So what would be the method of, say you have hail damage on your roof? you have to take those solar panels off.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so that's called
So you
a.
call the solar company back and say,
Mhm.
come out and take those off and get a new roof?
Yep, so that's called it's a simple detach and reset. So if we did an installation, also to maintain your company's warranties. So when we install a solar system, we warranty that roof for 25 years on the labor. Any leaks, anything like that, and to maintain those warranties, you want to call the original installer first before anything else. Does not affect the homeowner doesn't have to pay anything else out extra to have that happen. It just falls under the normal deductible they would normally pay. Mm-hmm.
I'm still a little confused about the value though of solar panels.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
would you, as a blanket, say to somebody, you just spent $20,000 on this system, and I'm selling it, but nobody else, none of the comps have solar panels. What would I tell them?
So we were talking about this before. The
Yeah.
unfortunate answer right now is it's most likely zero.
Most
Okay,
likely zero.
most likely zero. I've had a lot of appraisals that I've done that have solar that I can't find a single bit of data that would prove that it's worth more. Here's the thing though. It's kind of like prepare for the worst and hope for the best kind of thing. If let's say you have somebody that's like, hey, I just put this system in and it was $50,000. Okay, I got a quote yesterday, I think from Tesla, it was gonna be $77,000 for my house, for the solar panels and power walls. Okay, so there's more than, and maybe you could talk about
I was
that, like
gonna
the
say, I'll
storage
touch on that a
versus
little
just
bit.
whatever.
Yeah.
Right, so it's gonna be $77,000. The cost to me after I was gonna get a tax rebate, it would be $55,000. Okay, my electrical bill is $250 a month. I have an electric car, so that's a little bit higher. But it would take me 17 years to break even. Okay, now if I'm going to be in it, and if they last 40 years, the long-term result is a benefit to me, and that's where some people say there should be credit for that, right? The discounted cash flow. I'm going to save, $40,000 over time. What is that worth to me today? Mm-hmm. Again, that's not something that's currently allowed. All this stuff is changing rapidly. Like we were talking about before this, the technology that they have today is way better than it was probably even a year or two ago.
Yeah.
So these regulations and what is allowed is going to be different today than it is 6 months from now. But here's where you come into play. I kind of see people go from both perspectives. One is that a lot of agents say we're probably not going to be able to get any value for this. Let's price it without it in there, right? So your house should be worth $500. You just put $50,000 into solar. Let's just price it at $500 because you're not going to get any value for it. Okay, that locks in that you get no value. It also locks in that your neighbor that puts solar on gets no value, kind of thing. It's going to take there being more solar here and more sales of it, where people sit there and say, it's just like landscaping in a new construction neighborhood. If you sat there and said well, this house has no landscaping, this one has it, and they've spent $50,000, are they going to get 50? Well, if they're the first person to sell, probably not. If they're the 12th person to sell and everyone else has been like, well, I'm not selling for less than $550, and then they get $520, and then I'm not selling for less than $550, and they get $530, you're going to get down the road where the value will be supportable. So ideally, you would say to your client, hey, I know you just spent $50. We may not be able to support this. If there are not market sales in the area, we're probably not going to be able to support this. But if there are market sales and we can show a $10,000 thing or $20,000, or maybe you can show the whole 50, then you're going to be able to support that in the appraisal, and then it's going to get easier over time. Yeah. Right now, there just aren't that many sales that have them, where people, as crazy as it is, I think most people say I don't know what the value is, and so I'm just going to price it as if they're not there.
And I don't see very many buyers either that are willing to take on that lien and qualify when they're stretched already to buy the house, especially in today's interest rates.
That's why valuing it when there is a lien and different things. That's why Fannie Mae says it's not really allowed or harder. Yeah, I think it's just one of those things you have to approach it from just like anything else. A deck, we were talking about this before. I did an appraisal where a guy spent $200,000 on a deck, and he was told, oh, this will increase your value by at least $200,000. It's amazing. And it was, maybe increased it by $10,000. And it's just one of those things if you have a solar company tell you oh, this is going to increase your value $60,000, be cautious. If you have somebody tell you hey, you might be able to get value for this. Here's the benefits to you.
I've had a buyer say, I don't want them because they're afraid of what's going to happen when they have building and what they need to do with solar panels, to take them off.
I think that's a little bit of like fear, like people just don't know them well enough, right?
And that's one reason I really wanted to be here today as well. As over my years of knocking, I've met with a lot of real estate agents, actually signed up to, and so you're a tough crowd, I got to tell you. But essentially, it's just setting up proper expectations, because that is the biggest thing I hear on the doors as well. Is well, we get a lot of hail out here, especially if I'm down in Fountain or up in Monument or Palmer Lake area, and it is just teeing it up correctly. It is a very simple process. Whenever you get solar, you just let your insurance company know, hey, I'm getting solar. It's covered under your personal liability. And then it's just detach, reset, same deductible as always. It is the simplest process ever. Matter of fact, we like to joke around, panels of this grade are like putting Kevlar on your house, because it's actually going to protect that section of roof. That hurricane that actually just went through Florida, we received pictures where these roofs are completely mangled, except for the whole plane that has solar panels on it is completely fine. There's nothing wrong with the roof on those side. They're rated for 200 mile an hour golf ball sized hail, rated for over 260 mile an hour winds on the racking systems. So these things have to meet guidelines, especially out here with CSU with their fire code restrictions. They're very particular. These systems are done incredibly well. That's also where looking into a proper company, getting a few bids before you actually pull the trigger is very advisable, because you have some people as well that'll put a lower quality tier panel on a roof, and then that's whenever you see those occasional ones that are fractured or broken, they probably used a cheaper product out of China or something like that. So there are a few other things that I wanted to bring up as well. Something that you brought up, I'm so sorry. I was just made aware of this yesterday, so still kind of getting my feet under me, getting prepared for this. So when it comes to the transfer as well, I'll touch back on that really quick. There is a way, I've spoken with a real estate agent in the past as well, where you just have to lower the selling agent has to lower their closing cost on that end, and then make up for the cost on the buying side when their homeowner moves over. You can also get a little bit of value back from the panels after that. One thing that the Springs is a little bit behind on right now compared to places like Denver, Boulder, Castle Rock is approval of green appraisers here in the city. Those are appraisers that have gone through training to understand and calculate what the actual value is added to a home of these renewable systems. Because the way that it works right now, let's say, for instance, I met with you and you had $200 a month on average electric bill, you have Great South Plain, we're able to offset your energy 100%. Lower your costs maybe down to like $150 a month, because the goal is to have at least 20 to 30% savings a month. If you're spending $200 a month in electricity, he's going to need a larger size system. He's probably going to be, what size system was like a 9 kilowatt, 10? Maybe 12?
I think it was like a 10 or a 12.
10 or a 12, somewhere in that ballpark. So the average home here needs maybe a 6.5 to 7 kilowatt system. So if he were to sell his house and he has a 12 kilowatt system, you have a family moving in that only has like 2 kids, they're not going to be using an abundance of power, they're actually going to be able to sell at the end of the year to CSU those extra credits that solar panels generate. So that's actually going to be a value point. It's like, hey, you're going to make money off this solar every single year.
Do you have to have storage for that? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like in mine, they quoted me like the power walls. So do you have to have that, or is it?
So the city here, it's called the net metering program. They've actually replaced a lot of the meters in the city for this already with the new updated smart meters. I'm sure if you've probably had those swapped on your homes. Those are made for this program. Whatever your solar produces throughout the day, what you're not using makes your meter spin backwards and gives you credits to the utility company. Essentially, they owe you power now, because whatever you're feeding extra goes to the transformers in the neighborhood, and it actually helps feed your neighbors power throughout the day. CSU doesn't have to transport as much. At night, they just reward you back those credits at a 1-to-1 ratio whenever you need it. So if you have 7 credits stored on the grid from that day, you only need 5 that night. You still have 2 that carry over into the next day, onto the next month. It's like AT&T rollover minutes, but with your power now. So one other thing too with batteries, I do not recommend batteries whatsoever. This is a very stable grid out here. Battery technology where it's at right now, everyone's R&D for these electric car companies is going towards more efficient technology in batteries, because then lithium cell, especially with how much the temperature fluctuates out here, you'd be lucky to get about 10 years of life out of that, and they're $12,000 on the low end per battery. So you store everything you need on the grid. We actually have an option, since we're the 4th largest solar company in the US. We use microinverters exclusively. We do have a way of having backup power fed to a home without the use of a battery if the grid goes down. CSU is a very stable grid. The only people I recommend getting batteries out here are first responders that work from home, taking calls during blizzards or anything like that. If you're on any sort of life support system, and you're truly worried about it, there has been a few more blackouts this year in springs than I think ever, but normally lasts for a couple hours. Very small market of people actually need batteries. Even if you have an electric car, the grid is incredibly stable out here in CSU. There's just been some changes that have made the price go up, which is why we've seen a peak in interest in solar. I'm sure all of y'all have noticed ever since Drake shut down, your power bills have probably gone up a little bit here in the last few months. Statewide average has gone up about 20 to 25%. Core Electric's gone up about 32% this year. CSU's gone up about 30%. They did a small reduction last month. But everyone's permitting department is backed up. So y'all are going to be seeing a lot more people with solar. CSU was about 2 weeks a couple months ago. They're backed up to 6 weeks approving permits because they are so backed up with how many people are going solar right now. So, I'll give all y'all my information as well. We'll answer a few more questions as well. I've got a little bit of a hard stop here in about 15, 20 minutes. But I definitely, if y'all have any sort of questions whatsoever, y'all are going to be dealing with this a lot more, and y'all are a point of contact for homeowners considering solar. They want to ask you your opinions first. So, yes, sir.
In your opinion, how long does a solar panel or the components last? I know you said the manufacturer's 25 years, but I'm talking about just
Like
the
actually
degradation
how
of the
long?
panel
Yeah.
and the decreased efficiency.
So what we've seen from the panels that we use, and this is kind of across the board for any tier 1 panel, you'll see about a 0.05% degradation every single year. So from factory specs, they quote a little bit higher than that just for liability to cover themselves, but we're seeing models installed from over 10, 15 years ago that have only lost 1 to 2% of their efficiency in that time. That's another thing that I like about microinverters compared to string inverters is you can just replace that one component, it's 25-year warranty, and then the warranty refreshes anyways. But yes, the panels, you will get minimum life 35 years. That's absolute minimum on these tier 1 systems.
Most of the panels are made in China and shipped here.
So that is true. That is why, so personally we use only American-made products. Ours are all made in Sacramento, California and San Antonio, Texas. But there's actually been a panel shortage lately. As a matter of fact, a manufacturer in India is getting sued right now because of their ethics in the manufacturing of these panels. That is one thing a lot of homeowners ask as well, because these can be pretty harmful components when these panels are manufactured. That's why it's better to go, so since ours are made in California, very strict environmental laws there, so everything is handled correctly with the waste. But yes, a vast majority of everything comes from China. There's actually bidding wars out in California on the coast for the panels coming in right now in those cargo containers.
One thing I wanted to mention is like when it comes to solar right now, how we talked about one of the problems with valuing them is like finding the comps that have them. There's a section in the listing where you can put in solar details. Yeah. And I would say on ones I've done that have solar, maybe 10% have those details. So if I want to search for comps with solar and I search those fields, there's almost never any information in there. So just like a point of helping yourself and helping appraisers and everybody, if you're doing one that has solar, it's really important to put that information in so it can be searchable. Also over time, one of the things he's talking about with more appraisers that are like certified in some of the green practices and stuff, like, I've done classes on that and stuff, and like right now there's just not a lot of people here that know a lot about it. It's going to be a requirement. People are going to have to do it in the coming days, but like, I'm going to guess your systems that are made in America, higher quality, tier 1, are much more expensive. They're much better. There's more value to them than other systems. So the more data that you can have in the system, right? It's not going to help on day 1, but it's going to help on month 1 or month 3 or month 5 when you're sitting there saying, hey, I have a client who has a legacy system and it was X dollars and here's 2 other comps, one comp that sold that we can prove a $10,000 adjustment on, but it was a really cheap system, and another comp that sold that we think we can prove a $40,000 adjustment on, and it was the same system. That's going to really help you in time. So the more of those details you can actually record in the MLS is going to help a ton over time to make sure your buyers can get that value. So your sellers can get that value when they're selling, and it's going to help the appraisal process. Right now, it's just kind of missed by most people. I've talked to a bunch of agents, and they're like, there's a solar section in the MLS. Like, most people don't, because it was added like a few years ago, and like I don't even think that they did a release saying it was there. So, just try to, if you have one that has it, make sure you put as many of those details in as possible, and that's going to help get credit. And the more that credit that can be given, the easier it's going to make it for solar to expand, for loan programs to accept it, and for Fannie Mae to also ultimately give the value, or allow the value to be given. So.
And one thing.
Time frame of when Fannie Mae might reevaluate the guidelines?
I mean, I think they kind of always are technically reevaluating. They really only come out with like new releases to like the Fannie Mae selling guide and stuff. I think it's like maybe once a year or something. Obviously, any type of government agency is not the most on top of it. So, right now you are kind of limited to what they're allowing, with the marketability of them. I think long term they're still going to kind of stick more with that of saying like with anything else, right? Like if you have a client that goes in and puts in really, really expensive granite, it doesn't really matter what the cost was. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what the quality is. What did the market deem that other people were willing to pay for a house with that caliber? So whether or not they change it, I don't know. It's just important to keep in mind that regardless of what changes they make or not, the best way to value it is always going to be market reaction. And so if you're listing a house that has solar, try your best to find some other ones that have solar, you know what I mean? And try to present those because they're very hard to find. And to be honest, an appraiser should go through and find those. When you're looking through hundreds of records, you know what I mean? Like, it's easy to miss them. So.
Well, and one thing as well, too, you would actually be surprised how many homes have solar in the neighborhoods that you work in, and you just don't see them because it's on a south plane on a property on the back of the home. Me personally, when I'm out looking, I'm looking for aesthetics as well, because HOAs appreciate that, and buyers also appreciate that. I like nice and symmetry on these systems. You can drive through and just look at the meters on the side of people's houses, and when you see those extra components, you'll actually be surprised what percentage of neighborhoods now have solar. I mean, just the last few years that I've been here alone, significant uptick in how many people have, but it's still only a 3% saturation in the state of Colorado because of population increase. Anytime there's a massive influx in solar, the population in the state increases significantly as well, and it stays about that 3%. We're noticing that changing though. More and more people, as they're starting to buy a home, since the interest rates have been going up these last few months, they're also looking at all the other cost of living associated in the home as well, what their utility bill is going to be, how green or efficient the appliances are. So more people now, according to studies that we've been looking at through Zillow and Forbes, 80% of homeowners prefer having a renewable system previously installed on the property than not. As a matter of fact, state legislation a couple of years ago, now all these new properties being built have to be pre-wired for the anticipation of solar being installed on the home. Matter of fact, the home builders are supposed to offer solar to the home being factored into the cost and just having a system installed already onto the house. So that was passed a couple of years ago as well.
So thank you everyone for joining, and let's go fight those appraisers.